For more than half a century, Hank Williams Jr. has lived as a symbol of defiance, a man forged in pain, sharpened by loss, and celebrated for surviving what should have destroyed him. But now, as new developments quietly surface, the story surrounding Hank Williams Jr. feels different, heavier, more fragile, and far more human than the legend ever allowed. This is not about scandal or spectacle. This is about time, survival, and what happens when even the strongest figures are finally forced to slow down. A name he never chose, a burden he couldn't escape. Hank Williams Jr. entered the world already carrying a weight no child should ever know. Born Randall Hank Williams in Shreveport, Louisiana, he was not simply the son of a famous musician. He was the heir to a myth. By the time he could form memories, his father, Hank Williams Sr., was already becoming immortal. When Hank Sr. died suddenly at the age of 29 while traveling to a New Year's Day performance, his legacy froze in time. The man was gone, but the legend exploded. And the burden of keeping that legend alive quietly shifted onto a 3-year-old boy who would grow up never truly knowing his father, yet forever defined by him. From an early age, Hank Jr. was not allowed the luxury of discovering who he might want to be. Adults around him, managers, promoters, and even family, made that decision for him. He was pushed onto stages before he understood why crowds were applauding. He was taught to sing his father's songs before he could process the grief of losing him. By the age of 8, he was performing publicly, recreating a voice the world desperately wanted back. By 11, he stood on the Grand Ole Opry stage, not as himself, but as a living echo of what country music had lost. The pressure was relentless and deeply psychological. Audiences did not come to see a child develop his own identity. They came to see Hank Williams reborn. Critics listened for imperfections, comparing tone, phrasing, and emotion against a ghost no one could compete with. Even when Hank Jr. succeeded, it was rarely framed as his own achievement. Praise was conditional. If he sounded enough like his father, he was applauded. If he didn't, he was dismissed. At home, the expectations did not ease. His mother, Audrey Williams, fiercely guarded Hank Sr.'s legacy and believed her son was its continuation. Her intentions may have been rooted in love and survival, but the result was suffocating. Hank Jr. later admitted that the pressure to imitate his father left him emotionally fractured. He was growing into adulthood without the freedom to fail, experiment, or simply exist without comparison. As he entered his teenage years, the cracks became visible. Though his voice carried power and authenticity, his identity felt hollow. He sounded like his father, dressed like his father, and sang his father's pain, but none of it belonged to him. The applause grew louder, yet the loneliness deepened. Alcohol and pills entered his life early, not as indulgences, but as escape routes from an identity he never chose. The breaking point, depression, despair, and the day he almost disappeared. By the early 1970s, the pressure that had followed Hank Williams Jr. since childhood reached a breaking point. Publicly, his career appeared stable. He was recording, touring, and continuing to perform the songs audiences expected. Privately, however, he was unraveling. The identity crisis that had haunted him for years turned into something far more dangerous. Alcohol and pills were no longer occasional escapes. They became daily companions. The loneliness he carried deepened into despair, fueled by the constant reminder that no matter how hard he worked, he would never be seen as anything other than his father's shadow. In 1974, at just 23 years old, Hank Jr. reached a moment of complete collapse. Overwhelmed by depression, isolation, and the feeling that his life no longer belonged to him, he attempted to take his own life. The attempt failed, but the message behind it was unmistakable. The weight of the Williams name had become unbearable. He later reflected that he felt trapped in a life that was scripted long before he had any say in it. Survival did not bring relief. Instead, it left him facing a terrifying question. If he lived, how could he continue this way? Not long after, Hank Jr. sought medical help. One doctor delivered a brutally honest assessment that would stay with him forever. He told Hank Jr. that he had been trained from childhood to become his father in every possible way, and that the process had been frighteningly effective. The warning was chilling. His father died at 29. Hank Jr., the doctor said, was on track to die even younger if nothing changed. That warning proved eerily prophetic. In the summer of 1975, Hank Jr. set out to climb Ajax Peak in Montana, not as a publicity stunt, but as a personal challenge. On August 8th, the mountain gave way beneath him. He fell hundreds of feet after snow collapsed under his weight, slamming violently into the rocks below. The injuries were catastrophic. His skull was fractured. His face was shattered. For hours, rescuers struggled to reach him. Doctors later admitted they doubted he would survive the night. Rebirth through pain. The accident that created Bocephus. The months following the fall from Ajax Peak were not a recovery. They were a slow negotiation with survival. Hank Williams Jr. spent weeks in hospitals undergoing multiple surgeries to reconstruct his face and stabilize the injuries to his skull and head. Doctors had to rebuild bone by bone, knowing that the damage could never be fully erased. The pain was constant, unrelenting, and unlike anything he had known before. Even simple tasks, seeing clearly, speaking without strain, recognizing his own reflection, became daily battles. During this period, Hank Jr. faced a deeper fear than physical disfigurement. He did not know if he would ever sing again. His voice, the one thing that had defined his life since childhood, was suddenly uncertain. He later admitted that the silence was terrifying. For the first time, he had to confront the possibility that the path laid out for him since age 8 might be gone forever. If he could not sing, then who was he? Two figures played a quiet but crucial role during this fragile time. Johnny Cash and June Carter visited him in the hospital. There were no speeches, no career advice, no promises of comeback tours. June placed a cross on him and told him everything would be all right. For Hank Jr., that moment carried enormous weight. It was not about religion or superstition. It was about being seen as a human being rather than a symbol, something he had rarely experienced. As he slowly regained strength, another devastating blow arrived. Less than 3 months after his fall, his mother, Audrey Williams, died. She had been a dominant force in his life, both a protector of his father's legacy and a source of immense pressure. Her death left him emotionally untethered. The woman who had pushed him to be Hank Williams was gone, but so was the last living connection to his father's world. The loss deepened his grief, but it also removed the final barrier between him and a future of his own choosing. When Hank Jr. eventually returned to public view, he looked nothing like the young man audiences remembered. He wore dark sunglasses to shield damaged eyes. He grew a beard to hide the scars that marked his face. What began as necessity soon became identity. The image hardened into something deliberate and defiant. This was not the polished heir to a country legend. This was Bocephus, scarred, stubborn, and unwilling to apologize for surviving. More importantly, his music changed. The fall had stripped away any remaining desire to imitate his father. He leaned fully into the sounds he had always admired but never been allowed to pursue: Southern rock, blues, and outlaw country. The pain, anger, and survival instinct poured directly into his voice. He was no longer trying to sound like Hank Williams Sr. He was singing like a man who had nearly died and refused to be controlled again. From survivor to superstar, the rise that changed country music. When Hank Williams Jr. returned to music after surviving Ajax's peak, the industry barely recognized him. The polite, carefully managed heir to Hank Williams Sr. was gone. In his place stood a hardened artist who no longer cared about fitting Nashville's expectations. What followed was not a gradual comeback, but a complete transformation that reshaped his career and altered the direction of country music itself. The shift became undeniable with the release of Hank Williams Jr. and Friends. This record marked the first time Hank Jr. fully committed to the sound he had been fighting for since his teenage years. Southern rock guitars, blues-driven rhythms, and outlaw country energy replaced the restrained imitation of his father's catalog. Collaborations with artists who lived outside Nashville's polished system reinforced that this was no temporary experiment. It was a declaration of independence. The audience responded immediately. Fans who had grown tired of predictable country formulas heard something raw and unfiltered. Hank Jr.'s voice carried scars now, rougher, heavier, shaped by pain and survival. Instead of hiding that damage, he leaned into it. The honesty resonated. By the late 70s, his concerts felt less like tributes and more like rallies. People were no longer coming to hear Hank Williams reborn. They were coming to hear a man who had nearly died and decided to live loudly. That momentum exploded at the turn of the next decade. Song after song reflected defiance, resilience, and unapologetic self-definition. He no longer asked permission to be who he was. He told listeners exactly why he drank, why he lived the way he did, and why he refused to explain himself. The message struck a nerve with audiences who saw their own struggles mirrored in his refusal to conform. Commercial success followed, but it was not built on compromise. Albums released during this period dominated the charts while staying true to his outlaw identity. His anthem about survival became more than a hit. It became a statement of worldview. Rural fans, working-class listeners, and those who felt ignored by mainstream culture embraced him as their voice. He was not performing rebellion, he was living it. Live shows became legendary. Hank Jr. commanded the stage with confidence earned through survival, not branding. The energy was volatile, unpredictable, and real. By the middle of the decade, his influence was undeniable. He was winning the highest honors in the genre, not as a tribute act, but as a dominant force in his own right. For the first time, the Williams name stood for two separate legacies: controversy, consequences, and the cost of never backing down. By the time Hank Williams Jr. reached the height of his power, silence was never an option. His success had been built on refusal to conform, to soften his image, or to filter his opinions. That same defiance that earned him loyalty also ensured controversy would follow him for the rest of his career. While other stars learned to manage perception, Hank Jr. spoke exactly as he lived, bluntly, publicly, and without retreat. Throughout the 80s and into the next decades, his image hardened into that of the outlaw elder statesman. He celebrated excess, mocked authority, and rejected Nashville's polished codes. Fans saw honesty, critics saw recklessness. The divide only widened as his platform grew. Hank Jr. did not adjust. If anything, he leaned further into confrontation, believing that truth mattered more than approval. The most damaging fallout arrived in the early 2000s. During a televised interview, Hank Jr. made a comparison that instantly ignited backlash across media and entertainment. The reaction was swift and unforgiving. Within hours, ESPN severed ties with him, ending a partnership that had lasted more than 2 decades. His voice had opened Monday nights for millions of viewers, bringing country music into mainstream sports culture year after year. Overnight, it was gone. For many artists, that moment would have marked retreat or apology. Hank Jr. chose neither. He defended his right to speak freely, fully aware of the consequences. To supporters, the decision reinforced his authenticity. To critics, it confirmed a pattern of self-sabotage. What mattered most was that it cost him one of the most visible platforms of his career, a loss that quietly reshaped his public presence. Legal troubles also surfaced over the years, including an arrest in the mid-2000s that ended without conviction. Though the charges were dropped, the incident added to a growing narrative that followed him well into later life. Each controversy layered onto the next, creating a portrait of a man unwilling, or unable, to separate personal belief from professional consequence. Yet despite the fallout, his core audience never abandoned him. Concert attendance remained strong. Record sales endured. For fans, Hank Jr. represented something increasingly rare, a figure who did not bend when pressure mounted. But even unwavering defiance carries a cost. Opportunities narrowed, media appearances became selective, and as time passed, the noise surrounding his controversies began to eclipse the music itself. Loss, aging, and the quiet fear behind today's headlines. For all the storms Hank Williams Jr. survived publicly, the most devastating blows came far from the stage. In June, his life was permanently altered when his daughter, Catherine Katie Williams Dunning, died in a violent car accident at just 27 years old. She was married, she had young children, and in a single moment the future Hank Jr. imagined for his family collapsed. Those close to him say the loss cut deeper than anything he had endured before, including the fall that nearly killed him decades earlier. Unlike his music, this pain had no outlet. Hank Jr. rarely spoke about it, choosing silence over explanation, but friends noticed a change that never fully reversed. The man who once thrived on confrontation became more withdrawn. Performances continued, but with less frequency. Interviews became rare. When he did appear publicly, there was a noticeable heaviness behind the familiar sunglasses. The bravado remained, but it felt quieter, as if something essential had been taken and never replaced. Losing a child did what critics, accidents, and controversy never could. It broke through the armor. As the years passed, concerns about his health began circulating. Hank Jr. had lived hard, survived catastrophic injury, and carried the physical consequences of that survival for decades. Old wounds, both visible and internal, never truly healed. Cancellations and reduced touring schedules fueled speculation, though he offered little explanation. Those close to him say the choice was deliberate. At this stage of life, he values control over exposure, peace over presence. Family tensions also surfaced in public view. His son Sam's struggles, including claims surrounding control and independence, added another layer to an already fractured private world. For a man whose entire life had been shaped by legacy, watching that weight pass down to the next generation came with visible pain. Hank Jr. had fought his entire life to escape a shadow. Now he was forced to confront the possibility that the same burden still lingered within his own family. Hank Williams Jr. has spent a lifetime proving he could survive anything, but now, as the spotlight grows quieter, the question feels more personal than ever. Do you see this moment as the beginning of a farewell, or simply a legend choosing rest after decades of fighting? Let us know what you think, and if his music ever helped you through your own hard times, share that story in the comments.